Okay, now I'm going to do another video on Rhino rendering, but this time using vRay. I'm not going to deviate much from the previous exercise or previous video that I did with Rhino render itself, mainly because I want there to be an analogy between the two, and we'll build upon this knowledge as the trimester goes on. So I just want to keep it fairly simple for now. So open it up with my wall that I had finished in the previous video, and same sort of thing. I'll change the camera length and begin to play with the viewport. Now what I'll do quickly here, like I've been doing with the other one, is I'll actually render out a sample of what's happening. So you'll see that vRay is very different. First of all, it looks different when it's rendering. Second, we're getting a much different background. Third, we're getting a different quality to the actual image itself. So there's a lot of differences. It will easily create a nicer rendering than the Rhino render. So in that respect, it's much better. So first thing I'm going to do is add a ground plane, just like we did, because we don't want to see a solid black background. In vRay, it's quite different. We don't have the tools, so when I right click over here, ground plane is not an option, and that's because we're using the vRay renderer. Now I should mention, if you want to use that and it's loaded, you have to come down to current renderer and make sure it's on vRay for Rhino. It is a plugin for Rhino. It does not come with it. The school has it. If you don't have it, then it won't work. So you might have to do it in the school, or you'll have to get your own version. Alright, so with that done, I'm also going to pull up the vRay tools. There's no tab along here for vRay. There should be. So I'm going to say show toolbar, and I'll scroll down. If it's installed, you should have this here, vRay for Rhino, and it will show up. You can see it off my screen here as another tab, and I'm just going to put it up there. So now I have my vRay tools available to me here. So the first thing I'm going to add is what's called a vRay infinite plane. Now it just looks like a regular plane, but what this is the exact same thing as a ground plane in Rhino. So when I render out, I'll use another button for render in a second. We're getting the plane, the infinite plane that is essentially the ground plane. What I might do is change my render to be smaller, because with the vRay it's going to go a lot slower. So I'm just going to cancel out of this and show you that tool. One thing you should note, that in the previous video we talked about changing resolution and render sizes through the dialog here, through the Rhino dialog box. That's not the case with vRay. It has its own options. So I'm going to go here to O for options, and it will open up some vRay options here. Now what I'm going to do, I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to do it slowly so that we're not you're not missing anything, and I'm going to just change it to something much smaller. I might even change it. I'm going to lock the aspect ratio just by hitting L, and even change this to something even smaller, 320, which will give me faster rendering as we're moving through this. So all I've really done is change the size of the render window. So we're not going to see as much detail, but we'll change it back so we can get some results. But we want to see this stuff happen faster. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at some of the other options for vRay real quick. So under vRay, what's happening now is it's using what's called a global illumination environment, and those should be on by default. And that's where we're getting this black background as well. So you notice if I change this to something else and render it out, I'm going to use the R button here to render. It's much faster. All right, so I can change the background. That should really have no noticeable effect on the render. It will if you're using reflective materials or other things, but in this case it should have no noticeable effect. In the end, it's not going to matter for us because we're actually going to have that transparent background similar to what I did before. So I'm just going to put this back on black so we can watch it happen. So the other thing I want to pay attention to is camera environment. We're not going to change any of these settings. the camera, we might change these settings. We're using what's called a physical camera, which is good. This will make it act like a real world camera, and we'll go into some of those settings soon. And that's going to be the first thing we're going to do right now, is we're going to add a vRay sun. So if I come here and click sun, and this is different than the Rhino sun. We could go into the lights here on Rhino and turn the sun on, but we don't want to do that. Don't mess with the Rhino sun. We're going to add this sun here, which is a vRay sun, and we're going to do the same things. This is much bigger, so I got to make it smaller, that we've done before. We're going to manually control it. So I knew from before that my settings were right around 35, coming from somewhere over here, and I'm going to say OK. The nice thing about the vRay sun is it's an actual object that we can see in the scene. So it's asking me right now to position the sun in the scene. So now I can see visibly where that's actually coming from. So if I use a top view, probably positioned it way out there, yep. But you can move this anywhere you want. It's just a representation. You're not going to mess up any of the lighting. But this at least allows me to see that the sun's coming at a certain angle this way, and then when I come to a front view or to a right view, any of these other sides, I can see the angle that the sun is coming into. And I think I can physically move this and change those. So that's another advantage to the vRay one. So I have the sun, I have the ground. Let's go ahead and do a render. And you'll see a huge difference right away. Unlike the Rhino render, it uses indirect lighting, which means we don't have to use the skylight. It's essentially using the skylight. If I open up the environment, you'll see that it's actually, this is the skylight that it's using. And that's similar to what was happening when we turned on the skylight in Rhino. You can also see it's completely oversaturated, which happens quite a bit. And we'll fix this in a different way. We'll actually go to the options here. You could begin to lower this value here, but my recommendation would be to never touch these until you know what you're doing. So what we're going to do is go to the camera, and the film speed is what we're going to control. In the old days, we would use different film speeds for different lighting conditions. In this case, if you hover over anything in vRay, let's see if it works for me. Sometimes when you hover over these things, there we go, you'll get a tooltip that tells you what these values do. Essentially, all you really need to know is that if you lower this film speed value, it'll make the image darker or get rid of some of that saturation. So I'm going to just make this thing, I know because I've done this a few times, something around 25, and render it out again. Again, the scenario is you change a setting, you render, change a setting, you render. All right, so you can see around 25, we're starting to get the details of the wall. We're starting to get some details in the shadow. So you may see a jump or change quickly because I did an edit on the size of the light here compared to just one a second ago. And you saw me at maybe you didn't see me, but I might have edited out. I said maybe you can change the direction through the gumball here. What I would recommend for the sun is not to do that. I would, I'm gonna try to keep my view. Select the sun and then go to your properties. It should look like this, but then if you hit the light, you have a lot of properties here that you can adjust the sun with. And there's extra properties here with the vRay sun. Ignore all of these for now. And then just come back to modify sun here, and this lets you change the angle. And so what I did during the pause was change these angles back to something where I'm actually getting some good light conditions on the ground itself. Alright, so what I'll show next is very quickly the material editor. Oh my goodness, this went big. Let me just narrow this down. Alright, so one of the things I did in the other one was slightly change some of the material properties. Material are different in vRay. You got to make an actual vRay material. So it'll possibly open up with this blank dialog box, and under scene materials here, if we right click, I'll put create material, and I'll just for now want to create a standard vRay material. And this will look just like the other Rhino material. You don't have to change anything. If you want to begin to change the coloration, we do it here. That's where it's sort of this dark gray. But we also might make one, let's just rename this. We'll call it the brick material. And I'm going to make another one, standard material, and call this ground. And I'm only doing this because I'm not sure what color it's actually picking up from the ground, probably from the layer. So I'm going to control the color of the plane. So now I'm going to select that plane and then assign, apply that to the selection. All right, so I should now have the white. If you want to see what this looks like, we've got a preview here obviously, but all I did was click the color, change it to white. Same thing with the brick material. I'll have to apply it to the objects, and that's different in Rhino than how we were doing it. Actually, I think, let's try this. If I select the bricks and go to material, we can do a checkbox here, assign material by plugin. That means we're going to be using the vRay, and I can browse, and the two materials I use should be there. And so that's good. All right, so now I've essentially assigned that material to that whole layer. So with that done, let's do a render. All right, and you can see how much darker the wall got because it turned those bricks gray. Probably way too dark. Let me go back to the material editor, and let's just make this something different like I did in the previous one. So we'll try to put a little slight coloration to it, but we still want it to be kind of light. Yeah, let's just go with that and see what happens. You've got to be very cautious with colors in vRay because they will jump out at you in a hurry. And that's because it's using, see that, a lot of physics to calculate the color and transfer the color through the scene. See how the coloration is also affecting the other color here. And that's due to the global illumination nature of the render. It's much different than the Rhino render. Alright, so we're getting close to having something, and I will probably just change a few options here. Not there, sorry. A few options. And what I'm going to do is change the output. So I'll go back to something bigger so that we can see a better result. Let's go to 640 because I don't want... Now we can also use some presets here. So I can say I'm using an exterior scene, and I want a high quality exterior scene, and that changes a lot of these values through here. I'm not sure how it's going to affect the render, but we'll take a look. Most of the time I've done this, they've been pretty good results. So I think when you do that, if I hit the check mark, it'll just use these presets. Now when I render out, it should take a lot longer, and I'll get different results as far as the quality of the image. You can see it's doing that. It's all longer because it's bigger, but longer also because it's using higher quality algorithms to make this look even nicer. Again, like I said in the other one, the way I would solve the mortar issue is to fix these in Photoshop, or if you want to get really tedious, just put a plane or something that blocks the light, but make sure you do not block the light coming from these sources here. So as soon as this is finished, I'm going to show you one more nice little trick. This will be a vRay bonus, and I'll stop it there because you can see how nice these renders just start to get, just even on the monolithic nature of it. All right, so the vRay bonus I'll show you is, and this is one of my favorite things in vRay, is something called a tune material. So, and it's really nice in this project where I will make a new material and call it tune, and it basically stands for cartoon. And try this again. There we go. And what this does is it creates lines on the edges, and that's what these are here. But it uses a base material, but we've already created a base material, so I'm going to have it use that brick material as the base. I don't think it'll really show anything in preview. You can barely see it, just a black outline here. So what it does is it outlines like it's a drawing almost. So I will render this out, and of course it'll take even longer now because of the lines that it's putting in there, but we'll go ahead and let it play through. And I hope as the trimester goes on, I'll build upon these so we can get better and better renderings. I just don't want to overwhelm you right away. And we'll talk later about, I think there's ways to increase these shadows, and we'll also talk about render sizes and view, resolution, and that will be in the next content, the next online content. Because understanding image resolution and what resolution you want to render at in order to get the best printing results is very key. Now this hardly showed up at all. Alright, so let me pause this a second. So yeah, it's really quite simple. What I failed to do was I created a new material, but I didn't apply it. Alright, so my default material, I'll just rename this here to my brick tune or something. Oops. No, wrong button. Try to rename. Brick tune. Good. And come back over here to the layer, and instead of brick material, we want this to be brick tune. But this gives me an opportunity to show you another trick, another bonus. Right? If I hover over the render here, you see there's another option if I right click called render in window, and this is extremely nice. What this tells me, if we look at the command line, select rectangle and viewport to render, I'll just select a rectangle over a certain portion of the image, and it will only render that portion out. Right? And this is nice because now we can see a comparison between the tune material and the rest of the wall. Right, so this is what I like about it. It starts to really emphasize the edges of this brick. So that's starting to look pretty good. Just because we're here, I'll come back. We can also play with the line width. And one of the other things I do when I'm playing and trying to figure out what all of these parameters do, because there's thousands of them, of course, is I'll exaggerate them. Like, I mean, this one's pretty obvious. We know what the line width does, but sometimes I'll go up to something high just to see the difference between the two. That way I have an understanding of what it actually does. In a sense, exaggerating it so that, oops, I need to, yeah, so that I can see the difference between one and the other. And that's what I've done. I changed it to 4, so we should see a huge difference. Of course, it's going to be quite ugly because it's thick, but that was done on purpose. So as you start to learn to render, that's a strategy I encourage, is one parameter at a time, and then a render, and then extreme conditions. Go to extremes on the parameter so you can really see what it's doing. So let me just render it all out as one, just so we have a nice image to finish on. And that will be it for the vRay tutorial. Just wanted it to be short. Of course, these things never end up being short, but this is as short as I could have made it. And I'll also teach you later in the trimester how to, like, the one thing you can't control, these are not vector lines, but I'll teach you later in the trimester how to get vector line weight that you can control individually of the image underneath. So we'll be learning a lot of different techniques as we go on here. So I'm just trying to introduce it to you bit by bit. And this is very similar. If I save this out as a PNG as in the other one, we'll lose all of that background, which will be really nice. All of that black will disappear. And it's almost done, but we'll just let it finish out, and then I'll say good night, and we'll see you next time.